The lady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, when you think about everything that we require just for our survival, not to mention the quality of our lives, everything is either mined or it's grown. That's the only way to get it. And yet this is precisely what the environmental left has targeted to suppress for the last generation. And as I pointed out recently, it's ironic that on the one hand, they tell us we have to produce millions of new batteries for everything from electric cars to the industrial grid. And then on the other hand, they're doing everything they can to shut down the exponential increase in mining that these so-called green policies require. You know, our prosperity requires not only the mineral resources that mining produces, it also requires cheap energy that fossil fuels produce. Last night, President Biden told us that the supply chain needs to start in America. Well, by God, the supply chain starts with the raw materials required to support everything that our economy produces and that every family depends upon for its survival and its comfort and its security. And that's precisely what this administration is bringing to a standstill. I mean, look at this war on fossil fuels. Fossil fuels produce 80% of the electricity in our economy. They produce it far more cheaply than wind and solar. Yet the very first act of this administration was to cancel the Keystone Pipeline, which today should be delivering about 800,000 barrels of crude oil every day into American markets. According to a study that was released this week, if the administration had just continued the energy policies of the Trump administration, America would be producing between 2 and 3 million barrels a day more than we are. Instead, we're begging Venezuela and Saudi Arabia to produce more. So much for Made in America. And that's why fossil fuel prices are skyrocketing. You know, if you're upset about record profits for oil companies, that's what's making those record profits possible. When something is scarce, it becomes expensive. When it's plentiful, it's cheap. Trump made it plentiful, and on Inauguration Day, the average price of a gallon of gas was $2.59 a gallon. Today, it's $3.48 and rising. Where the hell do they expect the electricity for their electric cars and trains and stoves to come from? If you deliberately were to set out to destroy the prosperity of working Americans, is there a more effective way to do that than dramatically restrict mining and drilling and then divert these limited resources from their most economically productive uses to the ideological hobby horses of the woke environmentalist left? Wind and solar are among the most expensive ways to produce electricity. And as Ms. Sagama pointed out, unreliable wind and solar require conventional energy in order to maintain the electrical grid. That usually means running gas turbines at ready reserve in order to switch over the moment a cloud passes over a solar array or the wind falls off. Ms. Sagama, what future do you foresee for our country if these policies continue?
Well, I agree with you. When we make energy scarce, we make it more expensive. And who does that hurt the most? Not the wealthy. It hurts low-income communities. It hurts disadvantaged communities. Having access to abundant, affordable energy it's the basis of human welfare.
So these policies are impoverishing working Americans, low-income Americans, and at the same time, our friends on the left says they really want to help these folks. Does that make any sense at all?
It doesn't make sense to me. And that study you mentioned, we could have 2 to 3 million more barrels a day production here in the United States where it's produced in an environmental manner. That means that we're sending about $100 billion from that same study overseas instead of enjoying the tax benefits of it here. That the taxes that come from oil and gas sustain communities, sustain vital services. It's, what funds the government is, private enterprise.
It's productivity, exactly right. The government doesn't finance the private sector. That's the private sector that finances the government, and that's what they're shutting down. I'm reminded of Leo Tolstoy's line. He says, "I sit on a man's back, choking him and making him carry me. And all the while, I assure himself and anyone else who will listen that I'm very sympathetic of his plight, and I'm willing to do everything I can to help, except by getting off his back." I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair